Thank you so much. So I love movies. Now I know you're all busy doctors or busy med students, so I don't know how much time you have to watch movies. People, By the way, as an aside, it's not the movie I came up here to reference, but the movie Yesterday is super, super funny. Anyone seen the trailer for it? Oh my gosh, you guys. Anyways, it's not why I came up here, so I'm not going to explain it, but watch the trailer for the movie Yesterday. Anyways, in the movie, I'm assuming most of you have seen Lord of the Rings. Hands up if you've seen it. Okay. So in the movie Lord of the Rings, in the first film, there's this moment where Frodo and his friends have just gone through a very perilous part of their journey. And they go from this intensity to this moment of calm and quiet. And Frodo sits down next to Gandalf, the wise wizard, and he opens up his heart to Gandalf. And he says, I wish the ring had never come to me. I wish none of this had ever happened. Gandalf looks at him and says, so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us. And when we survey the state of our country, let alone the world, if we think about all that has been shared today about conscience rights coming under attack, the expansion of assisted suicide, the widespread legalization of abortion, we're all thinking to ourselves, I wish none of this had ever happened. But it has happened, and it is the reality. So what we're left with is to ask ourselves, what are we going to do with the time that has been given to us? And whatever we do, at the heart of it, I believe, will necessitate courage. And if we think about what courage is, in contrast to its opposite of cowardice, some people might say, well, to have cowardice is to have fear, and to have courage is to have no fear. But I would say that is not what is the difference between the two. Fear is what unites the two. Both courage and cowardice have fear. The difference between the two is how they deal with fear. Cowardice is controlled by fear, whereas courage controls fear. Cowardice is controlled by fear, but courage is in control, and it controls fear. There's a great quote, and I know he's been mentioned several times. Nicole just mentioned him. I mentioned him earlier. Another great quote by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He has many. But in one of his papers, he wrote, there was a time when the church was very powerful, and he used the early church as a reference point to justify the type of direct action campaigns that he and his fellow civil rights activists had engaged in. And he said, there was a time when the church was very powerful. He said it was in those days where the early Christians rejoiced at being deemed worthy to suffer for what they believed in. He said in those days, the church was not merely a thermometer that recorded the ideas and principles of popular opinion. He said it was a thermostat that transformed the mores of society. Not a thermometer, a thermostat. The thermometer tells us the temperature. The thermostat turns up the heat. And we have to turn up the heat. And you in particular. I often say, I have three best friends from childhood. I'm the black sheep. All three of them are family doctors. They all knew in high school they wanted to be family doctors, and they all loved sciences and were really smart. And I was the artsy one. And so when we hang out and we go places and people, oh, you're a doctor, are you a doctor too? And I'm always like, no, I deal with the ethical of the medical. But I have seen through my three best friends from childhood and many other friends that are also physicians, that you are really on the front lines. People will laud me and say, oh, you're on the front lines. Oh, you do these debates. But you didn't get into your job to do debates. And you didn't get into your job to risk losing your job. I'm in my job to be put out of work. As long as people are sick, you will always be needed. You are really on the front lines. And it is very hard to do what you do in the climate we're in. But all the more, the world needs you to turn up the heat. So what I want to reflect on this evening are 5 approaches or perspectives that I think are needed when turning up the heat to ensure that you act with courage. Remembering, as I've heard it once said, that courage is not an absence of fear. It's a will to do what's right in spite of it. It's not an absence of fear, but a will to do what's right in spite of it. So how do we have that courage? How do we turn up the heat? Point number 1, we've got to know our why. And that's what this conference is all about. What do I believe? Is it grounded in truth? Why do I believe that? And how do I express it to others? And our fear, even though it's present, will decrease if we have a solid understanding of our why. If we know we're aligned with truth, we can give reasons for that truth, and we can actually give it in a winsome way to the people that we engage. There's a great quote by Leo Tolstoy who once said, "Truth, like gold, is to be obtained not by its growth, but by washing away from it all that is not gold." Over here, that's the objective thing. I don't make it up, it's there, I discover it. I wash away all that isn't truth, and then I conform myself to it. So if we want to have courage, if we want the fear we're experiencing, which won't go away, but to at least decrease so that we can control it, rather than be controlled by it, our first step is to ask ourselves, am I aligned with truth? And we can already be a little more confident the moment we can say, yes, I'm aligned with the truth. And some of that fear will go down. And the next thing we want to ask ourselves is, okay, why is that truth the way it is? What are the reasons for it? And the moment I can understand those reasons, then again, that fear is going to go down a little more. But how do I express that? Once I learn about how to express it, which is what this weekend is all about, then again, that fear is going to go down a little more, so I'm in control of it instead of it being in control of me. In terms of assisted suicide, I myself spoke extensively about that in terms of how do we package our message for people, but just want to give you just a couple examples of, in knowing our why and learning how to best express it to others, how we can do it in a simple but a powerful way. I think, for example, imagining you having a conversation with a colleague who says, but I just don't understand why you won't be involved with abortion. You don't have to get feisty, you don't have to get angry. All you need to do is ask that colleague, let me ask you a question. If a patient came to you, happily pregnant, but wanted some advice about what she should or shouldn't do in her pregnancy, and she said to you, should I drink alcohol while I'm pregnant? What would you say? And the moment that colleague says, well, I'd advise her not to drink alcohol, then you can say, that's why I won't be involved in abortion. Because if alcohol harms a preborn child's body, then abortion is going to really harm a preborn child's body. Or you can ask a colleague, if a patient came to you with a lot of vomiting while pregnant and said, I just don't want diclectin, I really want thalidomide. Would you find a way to access it? And they'd be like, why would you even ask that? It's such a weird question. I love asking weird questions. I encourage asking weird questions because it keeps the person engaged in the conversation. And then once they can get over the weirdness of the question, they're going to say, of course I wouldn't pick thalidomide over diclectin. And you'll say, well, okay, is it because one is going to harm the fetus? Obviously. Okay, well, then again, you can understand a little bit better why I won't be involved in abortion. Or what about referral? It is so hard for people to understand why pro-life people wouldn't refer. And the example I like to use is to go to the BC College of Physicians and Surgeons and their policy on FGM. Their policy on female genital mutilation is not simply physicians may not do it. It also says they may not refer for it. So I would ask the person I'm in conversation with, why would the policy say more than simply you may not do, but you also may not refer? Why would it include that? Is it included perhaps because it's this recognition that if this is something I won't do, then I also shouldn't refer for it. But if I'm going to refer for it, then I also should have no problem doing it. So how do we find ways to decrease our fear by thinking, first of all, am I aligned with truth? Secondly, do I have reasons for that truth? And finally, can I express that in a reasonable way to someone I'm in conversation with. The second approach I think we need to have when trying to have courage, when turning up the heat, is to unleash the power, there goes my phone, of our minds. Wanted my page to stay open. There's like a breeze up here. Have any of you gone car shopping? Let's say you're looking for a Toyota Corolla and you test drive a Toyota Corolla, and then the next day as you're driving, you haven't bought it yet, so you're driving your old car, and the next day and for the next week as you're driving, what do you see everywhere you drive? Toyota Corollas, right? Have we all experienced that? And it's not that someone has secretly planned for more Toyota Corollas to be on the road. It's that you put the thought in your head of a Toyota Corolla, and now that it's in your head, you notice it. What thoughts are we putting in our minds? If we're continually thinking, I'm going to get in trouble for this, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? Oh my goodness, if I do this, will this happen? It probably will. We have to watch how negative we get. We have to watch how much we think about the worst case scenario. Now, I'm not suggesting we don't think about it at all. We absolutely need to be prepared for the worst, but expect the best. And it's important to do an internal assessment. Am I spending more time thinking about the one patient I'm afraid might make a complaint than I am thinking about all the patients who are really happy with my care? And the more time we spend investing, obviously equally in everyone, but investing our thoughts and our energy in the people that are being helped, A, I think we're going to have a general overall better outcome, but B, when the complaint rolls in, the college isn't going to just have to deal with you. They're going to have to deal with the hundreds of patients who can't imagine losing their primary care physician. The next thing I think we need to think about, or the approach we need to take to control our fear, to have courage, to turn up when turning up the heat, is to study people who just said no. They just said no. It was their act of resistance. And the more we fill our minds with the inspiring example of people who have gone before us boldly and courageously, it will move us in a very powerful way in moments that matter. I think of Rosa Parks, who in the 1950s was asked by a white man, or told by a white man, to give him her bus seat, and she just said no. Didn't yell, was calm, but powerfully calm. She sat there and said no. I see Tiananmen Square, 1989. What image goes off in our heads like a bomb? Tank man. If you look closely, it looks like he's almost holding grocery bags, standing in front of the tank. And you look at the whole picture, and there's a whole row of tanks. One man, just standing there. An act of defiance, resistance, simply saying no. I think of Dr. Halima Bashir. She wrote the book Tears of the Desert. She's a physician from Darfur. Early in her career, she was working in the emergency room at a time when the genocide was happening, and some reporters came to her and asked her to speak about what she was seeing as a physician essentially on the front lines. And so she spoke to them, and the story was reported. Not too long after that, a group of men showed up at the hospital, and they needed to have a meeting with Dr. Bashir. They took her away, they intimidated her, they bullied her, and they threatened her, and they said, in no uncertain terms are you to keep speaking. Shut your mouth. Stop talking about what's happening. Short while later, Dr. Bashir moved from working in the emergency setting to a rural setting. She was working at a small clinic. And when she was the only doctor working at this clinic one day, she heard this crowd of people screaming, and she exited out the clinic to look to see this throng of people holding children in their arms covered in blood, and found out that soldiers had showed up at the local school and had gang raped the children as young as 8. And so Dr. Bashir was the only doctor to handle that scene from hell. Not too long after that, some UN officials showed up at her clinic. We heard, Dr. Bashir, what happened at the school. Is it true? You can imagine what went through her mind. I've been asked before to speak. I've been asked before to confirm facts. Do I do it? And she did. She told the UN what she saw. She told the UN the brutality that had been inflicted upon innocent children. A couple days after that, a group of men showed up at her clinic. They kidnapped her. They beat her brutally. They tied her up, put her in a dark room with rats, and then gang raped her for days because she spoke up. She refused to be silenced, and it came at a profound personal cost. She survived it and managed to flee to the United Kingdom, where she has been outspoken against crimes against humanity. If we want to stand up in that confident but fearful resistance, defiance, we need to look to examples of people who just said no against the power structures, no matter what the costs. But not everyone does. Many years ago, after speaking at a church, an audience member called me and said, I have a friend who's pregnant, she's considering an abortion. I said, well, one of the first things we need to do is get her to a Christian doctor. He said, well, I took her to my Christian doctor and she left the office with a number to the abortion clinic. That doctor didn't say no to the system. But I contrast that doctor with another doctor who did say no to the system, realizing, as Matthew Kelly, an author and speaker, has said, the only way to say no to anything is to have a deeper yes. What is our deeper yes? And if we can identify our deeper yeses, then we can say no to certain things. And so there was a physician who contacted me more recently in the last few years because a patient of hers, 20 weeks pregnant, had gone to a private ultrasound clinic, found out that she was carrying a female and didn't want a baby girl and wanted an abortion, and went back to her doctor about how to access the abortion. And so the doctor contacted me, what do I do? Because I don't want to help her get the abortion, and I want to dissuade her from going forward. Because that doctor knew she had to say no to the system, that she had to stand up in active defiance from a culture that says, oh, just pass a phone number along. Because she had a deeper yes for the well-being of that woman, a deeper yes for the well-being of the child. So that physician strategized with myself and a Mandarin-speaking physician in her city. Very long story short, met with the patient, listened to the patient, counseled the patient, and several months later, a baby girl was born that patient is so happy to be the mother of, because of a doctor who said no to the system, because of a deeper yes for goodness, for truth, and for justice. I think even of Will, wherever he is. Oh, he's moved. Wasn't he at this table? What? We're now going to talk about him behind his back? Maybe that was strategic. So this time, almost a year ago, I was involved in a very tragic case. There was a woman in Vancouver that was almost 20 weeks pregnant and wanted a late-term abortion. And there was probably 40 people lined up to adopt her baby. She was offered work, she was offered money, she was offered anything you could ever imagine. Hundreds of dollars were spent to give her access to the top 4D ultrasound where she saw her baby's face and arms and legs and listened to her baby's heartbeat. I've never seen a harder heart because she went through with the abortion. But I was at an event the day that she'd had the laminaria put in, and there were so many people trying to convince her not to go ahead with it. And I remembered something. I remembered hearing that Will Johnson was the physician who was willing to take out laminaria at the 11th hour if there was a woman who had it inserted and did not want to go ahead with the abortion. And so I contacted Will and I said, if there is any chance we can get this girl to change her mind now, will you take it out? And Will said to me, anytime, tonight, anytime, I will go to my office and I will take that laminaria out. And he said, tell that woman this. He said, tell her that I did that for another patient. She changed her mind. She wanted the laminaria out, and I delivered a healthy baby boy. And she is so happy to be the mother of that boy. Sadly, that woman did not change her mind, but there's a baby boy alive today because not only a woman changed her mind, but because Will Johnson said no to the system, and he was willing to intervene at the 11th hour for the good of the woman and the good of the child. We have to study people who say no, allow ourselves to be moved by that, and follow in their footsteps. The fourth thing I think we need to bear in mind to have the strength of our convictions, to turn up the heat, to have courage, is to practice what we preach. If you think about what is at the heart of the pro-life message, if a woman in crisis comes to you, does not want to carry through with her pregnancy, someone is considering assisted suicide, whatever the controversial issue is, if you think about it, what's at the heart of what we're saying is this: you can only control so much. I know you want to fully be in control, but you can't fully be in control. You can control what you do, but you can't control how other people are going to react or what the outcome is exactly. What else is at the heart of what we're saying? What we're saying is, please look long term. Don't just make a decision based on the crisis of the moment. Imagine yourself decades into the future. Imagine yourself perhaps on your deathbed looking back. From that vantage point, which story do you want to be your story? What else is at the heart of our message? We need to do the right thing even when it's hard. To do the right thing can sometimes be excruciatingly painful. Also, what's at the heart of the pro-life message is that sometimes the answer is option C, none of the above. I think all too often when it comes to a crisis pregnancy, it comes to people wanting assisted suicide, is they think, I either, let's say, have the abortion, or my life is miserable. Option C, none of the above. You can carry through with the pregnancy and your life not be miserable. What's also at the heart of the pro-life message? If you were in ideal circumstances, you weren't in the messy moment you're in now, if everything was perfect, what would you do then? And then maybe you've identified what you should do now. Those same philosophies that we would draw into a conversation on abortion or assisted suicide is exactly what applies in the moment where you think, is my license on the line? Is my career on the line? And the same thing we ask of these people are the same things we have to ask of ourselves. We can't fully be in control. We actually don't know the outcome. It might end well, or it might not. But as my sister, my saintly sister, has repeatedly told me every time I'm in crisis and call her, you have to trust God. You have to trust that He sees the full picture and you don't. And you have to make the right decision on the here and now and leave the results to Him that you cannot control. You have to do the right thing even when it's hard. And just as carrying through with the pregnancy can be very hard for a patient, standing by your principles can be very hard for the physician. But what we tell them is what we need to tell ourselves. We need to do the right thing even when it's hard. Doing the right thing invites suffering, but so does doing the wrong thing. And the suffering that comes from doing the right thing, I guarantee you, is better than the suffering that comes from doing the wrong thing. I think of a woman who chooses adoption over abortion. Agony. Agony to bond with your child, to birth your child, and then hand your child over. Total agony. But the agony of killing your child, and then moving decades into the future and looking back at which story you made your own, that agony is far deeper than the agony that comes from doing the right thing. Finally, to have courage, to turn up the heat, to be in control of our fear rather than let fear control us. I think it's so important that we be magnetic. We need to be magnetic. To be magnetic is an extraordinary ability or power to attract. It is so important that pro-life doctors, nurses, social workers, and so on be the best in your field, so that your colleagues who may not agree with you on all the positions you take can't help but admire your skill and say, well, I think he's kind of weird on this issue, but dang, he's really good at what he does. Or his bedside manner is amazing. What is our character? What is our interactions with others like? The more we're the best at those things, that will naturally attract people, which will have an impact in a positive way. I realize we're of all ages in this room. My mom loves the old TV show Murder, She Wrote and Columbo. Now, who knows? I know what hands are going to go up. What hands are, the older hands are familiar with. But I know it because I would watch the replays of these shows. But both these shows are like these murder mystery shows where people are trying to figure out who done it, who committed the crime. And what struck me about watching, especially Columbo, but also Murder, She Wrote, is that Columbo, or Angela Lansbury, who played the woman in Murder, She Wrote, they're kind of perceived as dim-witted. You can't figure this out, but they always figure it out. Because there's something about them that's mysterious. And they come across almost a little crazy, a little absent-minded. But that draws people in, and then boom, they're sharp. They figure it out. So how do you be kind of mysterious? Maybe a little quirky, that attracts people to try to figure you out. If you ever feel like you're coming under fire, that people are coming down on you for the position you hold, don't focus so much on defending yourself. Focus a lot on asking them to defend themselves. Just ask questions, question after question. Well, why do you think that? What would you do if you were in this situation? And the more they talk, you actually will find yourself in control, because the person who asks the question is the person who's in control. I do that when I do debates, and if I have cross-examination with my opponent where I get to ask them any questions in a short period of time. They then get to ask me, almost like we're in a courtroom on a witness stand. And I remember I was debating a lawyer of the National Abortion Rights Action League in the United States, and it was her cross-examination. It was her time to ask me questions. And every question she asked me, I answered with a question. So that I very quickly took over control of the cross-exam. And then halfway through, she goes, wait a minute, this is my cross-examination. But magnetism draws people in. Questions draw people in. So when you come under fire, very gently, very innocently, very simply, just ask questions and watch Columbo if you want an example of what that looks like. The other thing that I think is important with being magnetic is allowing yourself to feel the weight of the burden, of the injustice. And when I got thinking on this particular point, an example that I wanted to use, a well-known public figure came to mind who's very courageous, who does not waver, who's very outspoken. And when he comes under fire, he's very steady, but he allows himself to feel and he shows his emotions. This person is one I'm often asked if I know. Every time I'm in the United States, Americans will say to me, oh, do you know? Any guesses? Jordan Peterson, that's right. And I thought to myself, I think I heard something about him crying a lot. So then I went to Google and I typed Jordan Peterson crying. And oh my gosh, hit after hit after hit is this fascinating compilation of different scenes of him crying. And then I actually found a 15-minute YouTube video of Jordan Peterson crying. I watched it. I know, it's gonna sound like I'm weird, but it was to prove a point in my talk. But I have to admit, after 15 minutes of different clips all around the world or interviews of Jordan Peterson crying, I thought to myself, what kind of person goes through hours of footage in order to make a 15-minute compilation of Jordan Peterson crying? And just as I thought that, a screen popped up, which you can't see, but it's a little black screen with a lot of white text, at the very end of the 15 minutes of compilation of Jordan Peterson crying. And this is what the person wrote. Jordan Peterson gets a lot of unfair and undeserved criticism. That's why I created this video, to show that a man that breaks down when talking about the suffering of individuals and the way to overcome it can't have any other desire than the deep desire to reduce suffering in the world and to oppose anything that causes its increase. Jordan Peterson, in my opinion, is the intellectual and public figure in general that cares most about the lives of people. I have never seen another intellectual that gets as touched by the undergoing pain and distress of individuals as Jordan. We have to allow ourselves to feel, because there's something profoundly magnetic about that. And the world is seeing that, certainly with the example of Jordan Peterson. So how do we turn up the heat? How do we be in control of our fear rather than letting fear control us? We be magnetic. We study people who said no, and we fill our minds with those examples and hopeful examples, not always dreading and fearing the worst that could happen. We remember to practice what we preach. And I'd like to leave you with a story that I want to recommend that you look into. It has to do with that first point of knowing our why and the power of why. And the story I want to leave you with is something to consider that you could perhaps even use in a conversation to explain the very position that you hold when it comes to being a pro-life medical professional. Imagine someone comes to you and says, I just don't understand why you won't give someone assisted suicide if they ask for it. And perhaps you can be a little mysterious, a little magnetic, and say, I know it's confusing to encounter someone like me because the professional bodies, the law, have all normalized this to make it seem acceptable. So much of the public opinion believes this is acceptable, so I get that my position seems weird. I think I could best explain my position to you if you'll bear with me through a story. And I'd say, before I tell you the story, I have a question to ask you, and that is, have you ever heard of Dr. Paul Brand? And so I'll ask you, have you heard of Dr. Paul Brand? A couple hands have gone up. Now you'll have to Google him. And so I would say to this person, Dr. Paul Brand was born in 1914. He became a physician in England, born in India, but became a physician in England and then went back to India. And he was famous for his work with lepers. Dr. Brand was a surgeon, and he was horrified when he went to India to practice medicine to see so many lepers with disfigured hands and feet. And in particular, he was a hand surgeon, so he was horrified at these terrible-looking hands. And people thought that the lepers' hands were disfigured because of the leprosy. And what Dr. Brand discovered was, no, it was that because of leprosy, they couldn't feel pain. And so they were doing self-destructive things like seeing a yam fall into a fire and just reaching in and pulling it out because they never felt pain. And all kinds of other things. So Dr. Brand worked with lepers to help them make conscious decisions not to do things that would harm themselves or to check their bodies where sores may have developed because of things that they had done. But then he did reconstructive surgery, beautiful reconstructive surgery on their hands. And after he had done some of his initial surgeries, some patients started coming back to him. They put their perfectly newly reconstructed hands in front of him and said, Dr. Brand, they're all bad. You have to undo it. You have to make the disfigurement come back. Do you know why they said that? He didn't. And so he asked, why do you want me to maim the hands I have made so perfect? And they said, Doctor, you may have fixed my hands, but you didn't fix my face. My nose is concave. I have marks on my face. No one will hire me because they think I'm a leper. My former hands enabled me to beg. I can't beg as well now. My hands look too good. I need money because I need food. Dr. Brand could have undone his surgery. He could have given to the patient what the patient asked for. But because he asked why, he discovered a deeper issue. And so he started doing facial reconstruction surgery. And he started taking pieces of the scalp and putting them above the eyes and helping restore the eyebrows that the lepers had lost due to leprosy. And their lives were changed. And you could say then to a colleague, I'm like Dr. Brand. The patient who comes and asks for assisted suicide is like the patient who returned to him and asked for their hands that looked so good to be remaimed in their disfigured state. Like Dr. Brand, I dig deeper. I ask, why are they asking me to do this? What is at the heart? And then I deal with the heart of the issue. I wish none of this had happened. We can all say that about abortion and assisted suicide and the attack on conscience rights. But all we have to do now is to ask ourselves what to do with the time that is given to us. Thank you.